Hey everyone, thanks for joining me again for another episode of The Future of Work with Jacob Morgan. My guest today, very special guest, Steve Bilt. He's the CEO of Smile Brands and the Smile for Everyone Foundation. Steve, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Jacob.
So for people who don't know, Steve is one of the CEOs who is included in The Future Leader. And he graciously agreed to join me today for an episode of this podcast. And it was funny because the more that I was learning about you and Smile Brands as a company, the more I was thinking that you're kind of like this mythical unicorn-like creature. So just to give people some context, you have a 94% approval rating. Around 90% of employees recommend working at Smile Brands to a friend. You're one of the top CEOs on Glassdoor. You got an award for Best CEO for Women, Best CEO for Diversity, Best Company for Leadership, Best Company for Professional Development. And I'm sure there's many other awards that you got that are floating around out there. And so we're going to talk about how you got those awards. But first, give people a little bit of background information about the company.
So Smile Brands is a dental service organization, service and support organization. So we have about 450 dental offices around the country that we provide full service support for, so that dentists essentially can be dentists. They can focus on their patients and not be distracted, if you will, by all the business elements that tend to slow things down and keep them away from their patients. We're also able to use that location to have full specialty support going through the location, so that a patient can go one place and get everything they need.
And how many employees do you guys have now?
About 5,000.
Wow. So you guys are actually a pretty large size organization.
It's grown a lot. It's a big sector, and there's a lot of things that we do that you create a lot of benefits from having some size. So having specialists who can do specific things like support doctors with financing programs and marketing programs and human capital support. And, the businesses are small individual locations, but they actually need full business support. And, as you know, when you're very small, you can't really afford experts in each of those areas. So by aggregating a lot of dental offices together, they're able to get world-class large company support while still focusing on their customer like a small business does.
Yep. So can you talk a little bit about how the company was started and how did you get involved with Smile Brands?
Well, I was on the founding management team of Smile Brands way back in 1998. And so I was originally the founding CFO, and about a year and a half later became the CEO of the company. And, that story had a lot to do with the company just being a very operationally complex business, and initially coming out of the gate, struggling a bit. I moved over into that CEO role and really spent all my time working very directly with the doctors on creating close relationships, so that we really got to know each other, knew what kind of support those doctors needed to be successful. That real hands-on experience enabled me to tailor the model in a way that now works at scale for lots of doctors. So we did that, got the model kind of right at a time when people were experimenting with dental. And as they were experimenting with it, people were building up businesses. Actually, 9 companies came public in like a 6-month period in the dental space, believe it or not. We didn't. All those companies ran into trouble with their models. We were able to actually acquire one of those that was about 3 times our size in 2003, bought another one in 2004. So suddenly went from having about 45 locations to over 300 locations inside of a year, which is definitely almost as shocking as this COVID experience in terms of, going through change very rapidly. So we did that, went through a couple sale events with the business. I stayed with it through the end of 2013. And then left the company, which was one of those moments where the newer investors decided that there was another way to do it. And
we're going to talk about that story. That's one of the stories. That's the story that I talk about in the book, which I loved.
Yeah, so I'll come back to that one. So we did that, and then came back to the business, reacquired it with a small company that my CFO and I had started. We acquired it in 2016, and then have been on a 4-year run since then of building it up and having a lot of fun with it.
So how, I mean, when it started, was it just you and like 1 or 2 other people? You had just one like dental location, or how did it begin and then grow?
Well, interestingly, so when it started in 1998, I had just been part of a company, a New York Stock Exchange company that had been sold, and came over, and we actually acquired 3 little companies with our private equity partners at the time. So we kind of went from a few of us in a business plan to then relatively quickly having a small company, with the 40 locations. This last time when we restarted, it was originally just my CFO and I, so there were 2 of us. That was kind of an interesting time. And then we started a search fund with our private equity partners, looked for businesses, actually had 3 offices, so there were only 5 or 6 employees originally. And then we acquired my old company back and suddenly went from 3 offices to 350 offices overnight, which was another kind of fast change of it.
Crazy. So why do you do what you do?
So, I started out my career on the finance side, but have always been in the service business since public accounting way back in 1995. So I've always been very attracted, actually 93, very attracted to the service business and the healthcare service business. And dental specifically, I came from a little bit higher acuity healthcare and fell in love with dental for a bunch of reasons. But, the business side of me loved it because it's consumer driven, meaning people choose where to go, versus, coming from broader healthcare as kind of a payer or another doctor told them where to go. So I liked the business aspect of people choosing, the customer choosing. Because to me, if the customer choosing meant that if they felt like your quality was higher and your value was better and convenience was better, they would choose you over someone else. So I looked at the sector, and 50% of the country wasn't in regular care. So I said, well, that's interesting. If 50% of the country is not in regular care, and we can deliver something that has a high quality, actual and perceived, high value, actual and perceived, we'll get our disproportionate share of those 50% of the people that aren't going. And so we really set out to do that, create a retail model. So it's consumer facing. We put it in strip malls, so the patient would see us when they drove by in their car. We'd advertise. That would activate people into care. And then because the value was good and the quality was high, we felt like we could sustain a business doing that. And so that was kind of the original business premise. Then the passion premise has come from the fact that people really neglect, based on that statistic, they're neglecting their oral health care. And the longer I've been in it, almost daily, we come up with another connection between oral health and systemic health. And, a lot of disease states are either comorbid, meaning they're present in both places, or they're actually led by a lack of oral health. And so to me, activating more people into care, keeping them into care is a big step in the healthcare chain. So it becomes a big mission to put a dent in that universe of percentage of people going is where the passion taps in. Got it. And
Thank you. My wife just brought me coffee. You saw like a little hand flying to the camera. So, you've done a lot of really, really interesting stuff as the CEO of Smile Brands. You guys got a lot of awards, but it wasn't without its challenges. And when I spoke with you for the book, you shared actually this really fascinating story of how you were the CEO, and then you and I believe your co-founder, you left, somebody else took over. And can you share what happened with that story and what they did, the impact it had on the company, and why you came back?
Sure. So, I was the CEO of the company, and I've been there for a long time. And when you're the founder of the company and it's sold a couple times successfully, you get a suggestion at some point that you retire, right? Or pursue other interests, which is code for getting fired. So, it's that's what happened. And
go do something else, Steve. You look like you need to relax.
Right. So you go pursue other interests, spend more time with the family, whatever the code is for someone telling you it's time to go. So, and it was okay. Like it was, maybe it was the right time to move on. I don't know, or certainly didn't know at the time. What I did find out is I had a real passion for the business and missed it. And then what was learned in terms of an observation of the business is, we always connected. I mentioned earlier, like I spent my early years running the business, connecting with our doctors and our teams, understanding what made them tick and what they needed from the business. And we would distill that down into, as you know, I love 3-word phrases. So we distill that down into various 3-word phrases. One of those was smiles for everyone. And, I wear that on my wrist. We talk about it all the time. We talk about this concept of a virtuous circle, which is every one of our constituents getting a fair deal from us, whether that's patients, employees, providers, our vendors, our community, our investors. And we took that really seriously and pursued that win-win around all 6 of those axes pretty relentlessly. When I left or was asked to leave, the company tried to move to a much more kind of execution-oriented, nothing wrong with that, but less personal, mission-driven style or touch. And I think it was because the people who ran it behind me didn't necessarily understand that we were really serious about that. Like when we evaluate a deal, we just say, look, is this going to be good for you and is it going to be good for us? I was just on the phone today with someone saying, I'm not sensing by your body language that you feel like this is a good deal for you. It's a good deal for us, but if you don't feel if you shouldn't do this, that's smiles for everyone. And the guy's like, wow, that is great to hear. And let me clear that up. And so we had a great conversation with that basis. And we think that way with all of our employees, our patients, and everyone. That becomes part of your DNA as a culture. And when you take that away and replace it by saying, well, we can do better if this metric's higher or this metric moves further downfield. A company like ours just loses its soul, if you will, or loses its heart. And it's amazing because everything about our business is that last 5% or that little extra mile. And you think about it, it's true of anything that you put your hands on. You think about your book, right? If you didn't care deeply about the outcome, you could have got to the page count a lot faster.
Oh, yeah.
And you probably would have went through a lot less rewrites and scrapped a lot less content to find other kind of, and that's what matters, that extra work through the lunch break, that stay an extra half hour to make sure that patient gets their care. But when you're in a business, multi-site, 400 and some odd locations, going after 4 or 5% same-store growth, if I tell you someone stayed through lunch, a doctor, to get a case done, or stayed an extra half hour to finish a case, that's not 5%. That's like 10, 12%.
Yeah.
Right? But it all comes down to that, people really caring, and then you showing them that you care about them. So that was taken away. And so to answer your question, when I came back to the company, I went around and talked to, I think it was 1,500 people live out of our group. Wow. And we'd be in rooms, and sitting there, this is back at the time you actually sat in the same room with each other. Right? That's a long time ago, but you sat in the same room with each other. And they would say, hey, are we serious about this bringing smiles for everyone back? And I said, of course we are. I said, so we can wear the wristbands again? And I kid you not, like I'm wearing one of these, right? I always do every day. People would literally, they came to the meeting, they go, oh, thank goodness. They'd pull them out of their pocket and put them on and say, I've been saving this for this day. I was gone for 2.5 years. Yeah. People were saving those in destroyed, hiding them for when I hopefully came back. And so that was the biggest thing. And people always kind of scratch their head and go, really? And don't get me wrong, there were lots of tactical things that had changed that had to be adjusted back. But none of those could have been adjusted back until the spirit or the culture was back.
And just so I was flipping through the page in the book where I talk about this. And so it went from smiles for everyone, and then they changed it to give providers and their dental teams the freedom to put patients first so that they can become the most preferred dental office in their community. So somebody might read that and say, okay, well, that's not terrible. Right? Nope. It's not bad. Why did that not resonate as much with your people, with your customers, as smiles for everyone?
So you're correct. It's not bad. There's nothing wrong with what they were saying. Now, I would say my critique of it was that that's not exactly a pithy statement that just rolls off the tongue.
It's not.
It doesn't fit on a wristband either, which is a big problem for me, or as a 3-word slogan on a shirt or a name tag. But the bigger problem with that was we had set our entire culture around sitting down and checking in to our mission statement. We started every meeting saying this meeting is about moving us closer to our vision of delivering smiles for everyone. And here's how it happens. And then when we were working with people, we would check in and say, are we moving together towards smiles for everyone? And by the way, you know who gets to evaluate that for you? You.
Yeah.
And who evaluates it for me? Me. When you start talking about what I can't remember the entire thing you just said because I sort of block it out, but putting providers in a position to be the preferred provider in their community, you don't really roll that off the tongue and say, hey, am I putting you in a position to be the preferred provider in your community? So it becomes a statement that exists on a wall or a shelf, but it's not breathing. It doesn't have a pulse. Yeah. And so the way we do it, now again, if we just put the 3 words on the wall and didn't talk to them, it wouldn't matter anyway. But we keep it really short and tight so we can check in and say, are we doing this? Are we moving closer to this? And that just became part of our DNA. And when you move to that generic thing that could be any dental company.
Yeah. Really good. And in fact, any business, if you swap out dental provider with like store, you can kind of copy and paste that for anybody.
Copy and paste for anybody. So therefore it loses its meaning. Right? For us, when we say smiles for everyone, it's unique to us because we're talking about how the emotion we're getting from people. And by the way, it happens to tie into dental also, right? And then everyone meant all of our constituents. And so it became it's more how we use it. And because we use it in every meeting, we try to use it in every interaction. As soon as you start to lengthen it to create more explanation for it, you're doing 2 things. You're making it harder to use, and you're also telling people what the standard of success is. When the point of the mission statement that we have is only you, Jacob, can say what makes you smile in this situation. So I can't put criterion around it to say, well, as long as my lighting's good enough, you're going to be happy with this interview. As long as my shirt's the right color, I can't put the standards on it. Only you get to judge that. And so that's why I very consciously kept it very short. So it was highly subjective, but you as the constituent and me as the constituent would evaluate it qualitatively. And another thing, which that means I have to ask you if it's working for you. Yeah. I just hand you statistics and say it is working for you, which is what most businesses do.
I like it. Yeah, it's definitely more human in that regard for sure. Well, so now lately, of course, with what's been going on with COVID, Black Lives Matter, there's just been a lot of madness and chaos in the world. Can you share a little bit about the impact that's had on you? I mean, I'm assuming, especially with COVID, that's been probably very, very tough for you guys. But how have you been doing as a company?
Well, and I want to talk about both of them because they've both been very impactful for us. So COVID was quantitatively incredibly impactful. I think we dropped 93% in 3 days as a business. So that's a wake-up call.
Wow.
Wake-up call. You used to look up and go, wow, this is
93%?
Yeah, I mean, it was just straight off the edge, right?
Wow.
So in that case, we had to do a few things from a leadership perspective and a company perspective that in hindsight worked out pretty well. At the time, I wasn't so sure, right? So, one of the things that I did as a leader is, I could feel the stress of that kind of impact, obviously. You'd kind of be dead not to, right? So I felt the stress of that impact. And I remember going to my people pretty early on and said, we're going to meet every day on this. We're going to be constantly talking about it. We're going to communicate really heavily into the organization. But just know something. This is my first pandemic, so I'm probably not going to do it that well. I'll make you guys a promise. My second pandemic, I'm going to be really good at this. But for my first pandemic, we're kind of going through it and learning together. So bear with me. Now, obviously, there's a little bit of tongue in cheek there, but there's also a lot of sort of this underlying freedom for everyone on the management team to go, guys, we're going to figure this out together and make short cycle decisions, come together a lot, but don't be afraid of being wrong, because none of us have done this before. So we really did go through that. And now this is 6 months in now. My senior leadership team and I, which is 14 people, we've met every single day. We stopped doing Saturdays and Sundays, but for the first month, it was every single day. Then it's been every single Monday to Friday day we've met. My senior operating team, which is four people, 5 of us total, right? We meet every single day also. So you're talking about a pretty, intensive, group coming together pretty regularly to try to make sure that we're communicating and making micro adjustments to the business. So, we had to go through furloughing 85% of the workforce, incredibly painful. But I told people, I said, look, we're going to get through this. I said, the only thing more painful than going through this pandemic and all this pullback would be going through it and then not having a job on the other side. Yeah. So we're going to get through this. It's going to be painful. We're going to get through it. So we communicated a lot around that. We also set in mind a canyon metaphor, not a mountain metaphor, but a canyon metaphor. And the reason the canyon was so important is we sort of started here, we slid down to the bottom, which could still be a mountain metaphor. But what I wanted people to think about is surviving on that canyon floor during COVID and then building back to a new place, not climbing back to the old place. So we really reinvented every aspect of our business while we were on the canyon floor and as we started to emerge back out. And now we've emerged back out the other side. We've got 100% of our revenue back, 101% of our revenue back, and well more than 100% of our profitability back.
Wow.
So we were able to rebuild it in a way that's different. And now we're fighting to add different services and a different approach so we can continue to grow without necessarily trying to go back to the old model, which the world's not ready for yet.
Yeah.
A dental office can't handle that kind of throughput yet. So we have to find other ways to do it. So we've really done those things. And then again, just micro adjusted every single day to get the model to the right place. So
how did you, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to switch to the other side. So I'll stay on this topic for a second.
So I'm really curious. So having the furlough 85% of your workforce, I mean, that is, of course, devastating. It's huge. I mean, that's a massive percent of the workforce. Can you talk about how did you communicate this? How did you handle this with your people? Because obviously this is something that, your company got a lot of awards for your leadership style and how you do things. So how do you think you approach this differently than maybe most other companies who just basically said, like, you're out of a job, sorry?
So, one of the things that I've long done is I really have one version of my message. It's the same one the board gets and the rank and file of our team gets. So I would honestly have a very similar, almost the same conversation. The board meetings were on the computer screen. The meetings with the team were on the computer screen. This was the same message going out to both constituencies. And I mean the board, my senior leadership team, and then we were doing very consistent messaging 2, 3, 4 times a week to our workforce. So when this was happening and people were getting furloughed and we have all this change going on, they were on a webinar 2, 3 times a week with me and other members of the senior leadership team, telling them exactly what was going on. Here's 100% of what we know. And we were really trying to adjust our messaging to what people needed from us. And that didn't have to be traditional stuff a company would do. So we could be hearing on the webinar that people are having trouble getting unemployment. So we'd say, okay, we're going to put someone on that and figure out how to get you signed up or help you sign up in your state. Or whatever the issue was, we would try to just partner with our people to help them get through it. And then know we were going to be here for them on the other side. And then there were times when the message was, you know what, federal unemployment benefits are great. You might even be making more than you were with us. But no, we have to come off the canyon floor now, which means we need people to come back to work. And if you don't want to, I understand, because you might be scared, you might have a health issue, but don't do it just because you're making more money not working, because come July 31st, that ends. And if we've filled the position, I can't now terminate the person who I just hired. So it's coming. And so we started signaling that really early on. And it worked out great. Like, we needed people. There were just enough people to come back. If people said, I want to come back for a few hours, we'd create job sharing. And so we really tried to be flexible and live to that. Yeah, it's still my first pandemic. I'm not sure exactly what to do. Tell me what's working for you. Tell me what's not working. And let's just keep adjusting our approach so that it kind of meets both our needs. I think we had a mature enough relationship with our employee base that we were able to say, I get it, and you'd rather come back to work, in my example, on August 1st, the day after benefits end, but that might not work, and I just want you to understand that. And so we really signaled it, and we were just able to keep that balance by, I think, having, again, that more mature, open conversation with our team at all the levels. And it hasn't been perfect, don't get me wrong, but that's served us really well. I think all of us, the collective us, meaning us and our team.
What is the corporate culture like at Smile Brands?
Well, hopefully corporate extends across all the entities, not the corporate office, but our footprint. I believe it's very camaraderie driven. So, we talk about supporting each other, taking care of each other, being there for each other, right, as a team. And so that's probably number one is, we're in this together. We rise and fall together. Let's support each other, which actually goes to your second part of your question, which was around the Black Lives Matter movement, around all the social unrest, around the horrible dialogue in this country in terms of the way we seem to talk to each other these days, right? And it was creating a lot of stress in the organization in the middle of the pandemic, which, people were struggling with. And so while I would have liked to have said Smiles for Everyone is enough of a guideline for how to treat each other, it turns out because there was new things happening, like what's a microaggression and how do I deal with that? And, can someone wear this hat into our office? What if we get an anti-masker in our office and they won't wear the mask? And now what do we do? And all the craziness. So we came out of the platform, again, 3 words drive everything we do, a platform called Safe Smile Space, which is what we call S3. Our service platform is G3, greeting, guiding, gratitude. So we came out with Safe Smile Space. And the idea of Safe Smile Space was this would essentially be our offices, if you will, would be this tent or this safe haven where people were free from, hopefully, COVID, because we have 1,000 procedures around keeping COVID in check in our dental offices. We had a great deal of success with that in our offices, but also now how we deal with the social dialogue and the social unrest and all the trouble and challenges that go with that. So we laid out 5 tenets. Those tenets included how you deal with microaggressions and how you receive someone sharing that with you, and what we do if someone doesn't want to follow our safety protocols, which, by the way, is tell the patient we can't treat them because we have to take care of our people, right? But, we had to go through that and give our people permission to deal with that. And then permission to say, hey, I feel like this microaggression had occurred, and help people understand, A, what it was, and B, how to receive it. So we put out the S3. Then we've done these listening sessions. So we'll have big, open forum, town hall kind of listening sessions with myself and various other people in the company who might be from a group that would experience microaggressions. To help people understand, like, how does that impact people? What are they? How do you receive that from someone? What should you do? If someone points it out to you, how should you treat someone who you might look at and say, well, they're from a certain group, right? So these are things that what I found is, like, as much as we've been exposed to these things in our country, most of us grown-ups haven't really had a lot of conversations about those things in a way that we can ask a question without saying, oh my gosh, am I going to be in trouble because I asked the question wrong? And so we've set up these sessions where we've asked those questions of people and they've answered those questions. And then our whole company can see those answers and say, okay, now I get it. And so there's been lots of examples like that where it's, I think, help people understand what it means to treat someone equally, treat someone fairly, to receive criticism and not be offended by it. And so that's really impacted us, and we've codified that into a language that enables us to have the conversations.
What do you look for in your other leaders? So when you are thinking of either hiring leaders externally or promoting leaders inside of your company, what are some of the things that you look for?
Well, probably a combination of courage and humility. So you want people who aren't afraid to take on change, but are humble enough to bring others along, humble enough to fail and adjust without having it be personally, a confidence shaker for them. And so, there's lots of language you can put around those things, around failing fast or being open to change. But it takes courage to make a change. It takes courage to face a crisis like COVID. It takes courage to change a business that's working okay, right? It takes a lot of humility to be wrong and to correct course, and it takes a lot of humility to receive feedback from people. Like, I know you're trying, but this isn't working. And a lot of leaders will just convince someone that it is working rather than say, okay, I hear you. Let's explore what's not working. And if they openly explore what's not working, it's usually like 85, 90% working, and there was just some element that wasn't, and you can fix it and move on, probably without too much pain. But when you keep driving forward without fixing the underlying issue, you end up with way bigger problems. So probably those two attributes. I think if it's not included in there, this sort of relentless pursuit of a fair outcome, right? Because, in our business, if we get a fair outcome across 450 locations for us, we get a great outcome as a company. We don't need to hog it in one place, right? We need everyone to thrive, and then we thrive. So there's an element there too where it's not the, I'm going to win this deal at all costs kind of mentality that really helps us succeed. It's a smiles for everyone. Let's figure out what the win-win intersection is. And that's really how we do better. So I think those probably three attributes.
When you kind of think through the history of Smile Brands, was it always this great place to work that had these awards, or did you have to go through some sort of a transformation to make the culture and the company what it is, or was it kind of like that from day one?
No, it's had a couple distinct periods where that was not present and it had to be instilled. And I think when it was being instilled, it created the learning of how important it was. So when we first started the company, it really wasn't so culturally driven. It was more of a financial engineering kind of concept. And it struggled out of the gates. And then we created this connection and this win-win pyramid with our doctors, which was kind of a Maslow-based pyramid that said, we need to ascend to this place where we're winning together, right? Where we care as much about your paycheck as we do our P&L, and you care as much about our P&L as we care about your paycheck. Yeah. Then we got this relationship where we can support that together. So we moved to that, and it was this immediate bend in the curve in terms of how we were performing as a company, which then enabled us to go do those two initial big acquisitions I talked about. And then we stayed with that in a big way up until I left. And then when I left, it was another 180 back to this much more, financially engineered approach to life. And it just didn't work. So then when I came back at 16 and brought that back in, it again cemented the importance of that. So we've experienced what happens when a business like ours doesn't focus on the win-win outcome.
Well, don't ever leave again.
Yeah, not going anywhere.
I know purpose is also a very, very big topic area for you. So I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about purpose. Where does it come from? Who's responsible for purpose? Is it the company? Is it the leader, the employee? And also, how do you think of purpose, and how do you instill it for your team members?
So I personally think the purpose has to be embedded in every aspect of what you do. So I don't think you can have a core profit engine that is completely devoid of purpose and then absolve your sins enough with good deeds to end up as with a purposeful organization. So I talk about Smiles for Everyone. That is our purpose. So we need to do that in our dental offices with every paying patient that our team sees. We have to do that with how we interact with each other, even if those aren't patient-facing activities. And when I say everyone, again, it was patients, it was providers, it was employees, it was our vendors, it was our investors, right? The business itself, and then we say our broader communities and world. So we don't think the value proposition for broader communities is any different than the value proposition for the communities we serve with our profit engine. Now, when we go out into Paraguay or Ghana or Nicaragua or Thailand or Laos or Cambodia or wherever we go, we're not expecting to get paid for those services. But the core value proposition or purpose is the same, which is to improve people's lives by improving their oral health, improve their lives by showing them care, right? Because there's two things, right? It's one thing, just showing someone care adds value. Then improving their oral health adds value. And so that was that from a purpose perspective is what we want to do at every aspect of the organization, whether it's, again, patient-facing, for-profit or not-for-profit, or whether it's just in how we interact with each other in our day-to-day lives.
Yeah, I like it. Kind of instilling it in all the different things that you do. So, you have a large percentage of your workforce that is, on the front lines, so to speak. Can you talk about some of the things that you do to help instill purpose in the frontline workforce that's seeing patients?
Sure. Well, and again, I think you don't want to separate it from your moment to moment or day-to-day activities. And so, it's on their name badges. It's, all over the office what our mission is. We talk about it constantly in terms of being focused on delivering Smiles for Everyone. We have metrics that we look at to make sure that's happening. So people we're caring for, the type of procedures they're getting, the way those services are priced, the number of alternatives they have presented to them, so we know where they're getting the one that fits them the best. And then the constant messaging, so all the communication in the organization to celebrate those stories where those things are occurring is really important too. Because, you are your rituals, people see what you celebrate. And so when really good, care-driven Smiles for Everyone moments happen, are we celebrating those inside our company, inside our organization, so that people know that's what we value? So I think those are the big ones. There's a lot of celebrating inside the offices too. So we have another 3-word concept called Celebrate Everyday Miracles. Okay. And the idea of Celebrate Everyday Miracles actually goes back to the mission or the charitable work we do. And what I found is, in our organization, our doctors and our teams are getting a little worn down by the grind sometimes. Like dentistry can be a grind. It is really hard work. I mean, you're working inside the space of a baseball, with your hands, you're bent over, it's hard work. And I found when we went on these international trips, we could be working in literally a garbage dump. And I mean, literally, not like the person in the coffee shop the other day who literally died because the coffee was so good. I mean, like literally a garbage dump. So you're working there, people are living in this dump. That's how they make their living. We set up a clinic there, and people are coming to me saying, this is the greatest thing I've ever done. I love this. It's incredible. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm like, so you realize, like, you do this every day, take care of patients, and you have a nicer office and better equipment. It actually works. You have a real dental assistant. It's not me, and you have all this going on, yet this is somehow so much better, right? And so much more rewarding and fulfilling. And it was kind of like, wow, it's amazing that when you take the profit engine out of it, if you will, and the work element out of it, it becomes so fulfilling what you're doing. And the reality is, our people, if they could see a patient and say, I know you're a little tight on money, I'm not going to charge you. And if they could do that, half the time, then they could maybe call the bank at the end of the month and go, hey, my mortgage payment, only half my patients could afford to pay me this month. So is it okay if I only send you half? They do it every day of the week. But that's not the way our economy works. So we really had to think about how do we tap into this wonderful work people do every day and not let this system where, you got to pay for it gets in the way of it. And so part of that's how we handle workflow. Part of that's who's responsible for what. But a lot of it is just stopping and making sure we see these things happening. So when we say celebrate everyday miracles, it's like sometimes they're true miracles, like we find oral cancer and someone's life is saved, right? Sometimes it's they got a new front tooth and got a job for the first time in 4 years. Those are kind of miracles. But sometimes it's just little stuff, like an employee hits, not little, but an employee hits a 30th anniversary or 25th anniversary that might have just been blown by. Celebrate it, right? So really creating a culture of celebrating and doing that every day, not celebrating occasionally or on national holidays. I'd say that's a lot of air in the balloon, if you will, is really teaching our team and myself to see those things and then call them out and celebrate them. And I guess the only other one I might add is, and this is more of a little bit of a personal one for me, is that I know for me, being a pretty driven person and hopefully looking at myself and saying, you can be better at this, you can be better at that. One thing I'd be very hesitant to do is look at someone on my team and say, I'm proud of you, because it seemed kind of parochial, and who am I to be proud of someone? And I've kind of learned to give myself the freedom to say, I'm really proud of what you did here. I'm really proud of what you accomplished here. It doesn't mean I'm better than you. It just means I saw it and I'm proud of it. And so whether it's that phrase or something else, but freeing people up to be comfortable in celebrating and recognizing is huge to the energy and the endurance of a company.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, the recognition aspect is wonderful. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the awards you received and why you received them. Starting off with, why did you get an award for being the best CEO for diversity? What are you doing at Smile Brands that is allowing you to get these awards and recognitions?
Well, I hope it's what we've been doing all along, which is, again, focusing on smiles for everyone, treating everyone with respect, and making sure that when we see things that go out of bounds relative to respect and the way people are treated, that we deal with them. So I hope that's what it is. I hope it's a longer body of work and it's a way we've comported ourselves, for the 20 years I've been running the company. I think the timing of when this came together, and we've been on that list, not the diversity one, but for women and employees in general, we've been on those lists for a number of years now. So I hope it's that, that longer body of work. The diversity one came up more recently, and that was a little bit more around this S3 platform. But the S3 platform, a little bit before that, was, I think trying to be aware of the fact that we needed to grow and evolve to understand the issues people were facing that were different than the issues perhaps you or I face.
Yeah.
Having, that you try to use that word humility to say, I don't know that I understand, but I want to, so tell me. And then let's create a world where the rest of us can hear about this and we can hopefully make progress around this. So an example of that, years ago, the virtuous circle model that I've talked about a couple of times, where we, the win-win, that we launched in 2000, 1999, 2000, it was something I've talked about since the beginning of the business. We started calling it Smiles for Everyone in 2005. But in 2005, when I showed it to the company and said, this is Smiles for Everyone, I said, this is my dream, that we can deliver smiles for everyone and that this can be our mission statement. And when I did that, I actually used Dr. King's speech and said, this is my dream. And I started with the speech. And so when everything started to happen in the last several months, I went to the company, I said, I want to start this whole dialogue off by saying, I evoked Dr. King's message when I talked about my dream of Smiles for Everyone. And I want to be super clear, like, my dream was obviously incredibly safe. relative to what Dr. King experienced, and we know how that ended, right? And I've never been through anything even remotely close to what he went through or what so many of you have went through. And so I just want to acknowledge that and hear about it and hear how we can be better around it. And that actually led to developing the S3 platform, which was, we need a safe space. And we're in a place where it's like we have a very diverse workforce.
Mm-hmm.
We also have lots of people in the workforce whose spouses are first responders.
Mm.
And it's like, oh my gosh, these two areas of society are really being pitted against each other in a lot of ways. And that's terrible. And although that's huge tension potentially in our organization, but under our tent, we're just Smile Brands people. So wait, how do we deal with this? And how do we talk about it? And how do we open up the dialogue? And how do we support each other going through it? And it's pretty remarkable that when 8% of the time, when you open up the dialogue and you're there for each other, it ends up pretty well. Now, that's not to say that we haven't had half a dozen experiences in our company since where we've had to let people go, where they just said, I stand for this, or I'm going to say it this way. So you can't do that. We're not going to tolerate it. And we've terminated over it. And, I hear all the stuff, freedom of speech. I can say whatever I want, do whatever I say. Well, turns out you can't. It's not okay. So, we've stood for it and stood, pretty, I don't want to say so strong, because it's not like we're facing the biggest challenge in the world by any stretch, but we've been consistent in that message and the fact that we would stand for this safe smile space. So I think that was probably the more recent change around that one that kind of occurred ahead of that particular survey going.
Okay. So I suppose you got it just because your kind of openness to different cultures, values, ideas, backgrounds, and creating a space where other people are not open to that, you have them leave the company.
I think standing behind it and saying it is a binary choice. Ultimately, you'll respect the safe smile space for everyone, or you just can't be here with a patient or an employee.
You also got an award for Best CEO for Leadership. And so what do you do differently, do you think, around leadership, just your approach to leadership and your teams?
The biggest part of the approach, I hope, is that we're bringing people along for the journey, right? So they've got responsibility. I spend a lot of time thinking about the organizational design. So there's a formula, right? Accountability equals control plus influence. And so if you want someone to be accountable for something, you have to give them the control or the influence over the resources they need to be successful. And so one thing we really work hard to do in our organization is say, this is what you're responsible for. We're going to support you in it, but you're going to drive the outcome of that, not us. It's sort of the opposite of micromanaging someone through a process where it's saying, you do this task, and that task, but if you get a bad outcome, it's your fault, not mine. So we'll spend our time trying to say, we're going to help coach towards how to move towards the goal and give you the resources. You tell us if you're lacking resources, but you're accountable for making the decisions and you're accountable for getting the result. And so I think, stylistically, we've tried to organize our entire company behind that philosophy, which hopefully frees people up to be better in their jobs and make better decisions and own them more.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. So when it comes to leadership, have you seen, because obviously you started the company in 1998, over the course of the last 20, 30 years or so, have you seen an evolution or a change in leadership at all?
I think so, although there's always this confirmation bias when you're sampling towards something you want to see, right? So I hope I've seen it where people realize how capable individuals are if you give them the latitude to run their business. And so, I think with the speed of business, with the level of change that occurs out there, with the amount of information available, for us, how distributed we've become, I hope, I certainly know with us as a company, we've taught it and lived it, that you run your business. We're here to support you in that. And then that translates down to how that happens at the individual office level. It's your business to run, and we're here to support you. So I think, less of that old school command and control, the guy walking down the hall going, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, and then, going into the office and, being done with the day versus, really coaching people up, spending a lot more time coaching. I think maybe a metaphor that might be helpful, the way I think about it is, I probably grew up thinking of the CEO role much more like the executive branch of government, where the CEO is the president who makes the decision, right, is the most powerful man in the world, versus perhaps the CEO is more like the Supreme Court. And what's more important is not so much the decision you make, but the how you make it and the precedents that you set. So if I make a decision, it's not so important that I'm right or wrong. It's more, how did I go through it? And therefore, when it's repeated 1,000 times in our organization, people know how to do it in a way that's consistent with the thinking I put behind it, not so much the outcome that I put in front of it.
Yeah, and I like the emphasis on the coaching, because that is something that I think we need now more than ever.
Yeah.
We only have a couple minutes left, so maybe to wrap up, do you have any advice for people out there who want to become more effective leaders? Something that maybe you've learned during the course of your career that helped make you become a better leader?
Well, and I talked about it at the beginning when I talked about my first pandemic. So, I'm going to make a lot of mistakes, but bear with me. My second one, I'm going to be amazing. So I do think you have to find a mechanism as a leader to be wrong. So don't paint yourself into a corner to have all the answers, right? So you're leading an exploratory process to get to the right answers, which is different than having the right answer.
Yeah.
And again, I think a lot of us grew up thinking, well, leadership means you already know the answer.
Yep.
It's not reality, especially today when things are happening so fast and short cycle. And oh, by the way, we're in the middle of a pandemic and social unrest and everything else. Like, really? So, you're doing a lot more to help people understand how to explore their way to making decisions or to commit to a decision than you are necessarily knowing the answer. So I think that's number one. And so, that thing about it being my first pandemic was a freeing trick, if you will.
Yeah.
For all of us as a leadership team to say, hey, don't sweat it. We don't have to be right. We just have to be moving.
So you're okay with saying, I don't know, and you're okay if your leadership team says, I don't know.
I think it's one of the most powerful things you can do as a leadership team is say, I don't actually know the answer to that. Let's figure this out. How would we go about figuring that out?
So you're not going to get fired if you don't know the answer.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I love that approach because, you're right. Throughout history, if a leader used to say, I don't know, they'd be like, what? Why are you a leader if you don't know the answer to this? Whereas now, so do you even yourself personally, outside of the pandemic, do you frequently find yourself saying, like, I don't know, we got to figure that out. I don't know the answer.
Yeah. One of the things for me is a leadership is I like to explore concepts, sort of that brainstorming approach. I tell my team though sometimes, sometimes I'll ask questions in the form of a declaratory statement. So just help me out there. Sometimes I'll be like, well, here's the deal. And it's like, I'm actually supposing that might be the deal. And so I have to kind of remind my team sometimes, like, no, I don't actually know that. I'm trying to explore whether that could be one of the answers that's possible. So I'm still working my way through that and learning to put a little bit more of an obvious question mark at the end of it. Right. But yeah, the best sessions we have, the most learning we do, the most growth we get is when we're exploring these things real time, not somebody running off trying to find an answer and coming back. So and again, I think it goes back to what you celebrate. Do you say, this was an incredible meeting because we explored like 5 different ideas and we don't know the answer yet? Or do you be like, oh my God, we just wasted an hour. We don't know the answer yet.
Yeah.
And so I try to make sure we're celebrating those meetings where big issues come up, and then we start to expose the path to an answer versus, hey, we know the answer.
Love it.
So that's probably the biggest behavioral thing I have to make sure we always stay true to.
No, that's great advice, I think, for everybody, especially leaders. Well, Steve, maybe you can let people know, where can they go to learn more about you, Smile Brands, anything that you want to mention for people to check out. Please feel free to do so.
Sure. So obviously, smilebrands.com is our website. I'm on LinkedIn, available there. Happy to connect with folks. I'll post things periodically about the company, what I see going on. Those are two great spots.
Cool. Well, Steve, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to speak with me. I really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Jacob, and thank you for the mention in the book as well. That was fantastic.
Oh, of course. And thanks everyone for tuning in. Again, Steve Bilt, CEO of Smile Brands and the Smiles for Everyone Foundation. He is in the book. There's a great story about him in there. And please make sure you check out Steve. You're on LinkedIn. You've been writing a couple articles on there over the past few months.
Yep.
So check him out on LinkedIn. Check out Smile Brands on their website. And I will see all of you very soon. Thanks for watching.